You're standing out here saying the reason I can't trust Jesus Christ is because some of his first followers were pimps and prostitutes. Former pimps, former prostitutes. Obviously, they turned away from that lifestyle. Obviously, they asked Christ for forgiveness. Obviously, he forgave them. And obviously, they began to live a different lifestyle. And so you got some problem with that?
Absolutely.
Boy, you and I are really different.
Who were Jesus' first followers?
Jesus' first followers were a group of fishermen, tax collectors, a Jewish zealot named Simon the Zealot.
Pimps, whores.
Pimps, whores, yes, that was definitely part of it also.
And you're saying these are credible people?
Yes, I certainly am.
That's ridiculous.
Oh, really?
How could you say
You don't trust fishermen, carpenters?
you don't trust pimps? You trust pimps. You trust whores.
I've worked among pimps and prostitutes. And there's some people that are pimps and prostitutes that I have learned to trust because the evidence is they're reliable. Do you think every student at UT Austin is reliable?
That's of course not.
Good. So how do you determine reliability?
Evidence.
Thank you. Evidence. So, when I meet a person, I don't cross them off as, oh, gee, you're a pimp or you're a prostitute, therefore you're unreliable. No. I get to know an individual as an individual, and then, based on evidence of reliability, I trust them. Based on evidence that they're not reliable, I don't trust them. It's that simple.
You don't think their actions dictate reliability?
In some senses, yes. But I've never met a perfect human being. That's why I would never put my ultimate trust in any human being. But I have met people who are more reliable than others, yes, sir. And I agree with you, there are not an awful lot of pimps that I would trust, and there are not an awful lot of prostitutes I would trust, but there are some that I got to know in inner city Boston who are reliable. Yeah, well, Peter, James, and John were not pimps, okay? Peter, James, and John were fishermen. Matthew was a tax collector. No, I don't trust everybody in the IRS, but I trust a lot of people in the IRS. Well, Matthew was a tax collector. Come on, man, what's your point? Think. God gave all of us two ends, one to sit on and the other to think with. Our entire future depends upon which one we use. Heads you win, tails you lose. Think. I hope that we in a university setting are not so elitist that we say you cannot trust blue-collar workers like fishermen and carpenters. Or tax collectors.
I didn't say that you couldn't trust fishermen and carpenters. I'm saying that pimps, prostitutes, and whores are not credible people.
Well, Peter, James, John, Andrew, Bartholomew, Simon the Zealot, Judas Iscariot, none of them were pimps or prostitutes. So what on earth is your point?
Their point is that Jesus' first followers were whores and prostitutes. That's a proof.
No, they were not all whores and prostitutes and pimps.
Was Jesus a Jew?
Yeah, he sure was a Jew.
Okay, so you're worshiping a Jew, are you not?
I worship a Jew. You got that right.
Okay, great. Now, what was Jesus' first meal? His last meal, I'm sorry.
What was his last meal? What do you mean, what was his last meal? What did he eat?
What was his last meal? What did he last eat?
I don't know what he last ate.
What was his last meal, specifically?
I don't know what his last meal was specifically.
Passover.
Pardon?
Passover?
Quite probably. What's the point?
The point is, you're worshiping an individual who went to rabbis and said he was the chosen person, when in actuality, it's a fallacy.
Okay, you're right. Jesus claimed to be God in human form. Why do you think that's a fallacy?
Why do I personally believe
Yeah.
it's a fallacy? I personally believe it is a fallacy because he had pimps and prostitutes for his first believers.
You got to be kidding me. You're standing out here saying the reason I can't trust Jesus Christ is because some of his first followers were pimps and prostitutes. Former pimps, former prostitutes. Obviously, they turned away from that lifestyle. Obviously, they asked Christ for forgiveness. Obviously, he forgave them. And obviously, they began to live a different lifestyle. And so you got some problem with that?
Absolutely.
Boy, you and I are really different. Really different. I can promise you, I am so blown out of the water by the fact that Jesus Christ never sinned once, but he forgave the kind of people that you scorn, obviously, and you obviously look down on. He forgave them and changed their lives.
So wait a
That's incredible, Bud. You and I are really fundamentally different.
Are you saying you've never sinned?
I said quite to the contrary. I have sinned regularly. So has every human being. And I am definitely a human being. But I can promise you, Jesus Christ never sinned once. And the fact that he was that pure and yet could deal with prostitutes and pimps and communicate the grace and forgiveness of God to them is absolutely mind-boggling. And I find it incredible that that would turn you off. Man, that's one of the things that turns me on about Christ. Religion knows how to condemn. It takes a personal God to forgive. And just in case you're wondering, you and I need forgiveness. Not just the pimps and the prostitutes, but you and I.
Just because he can accurately deal with people, does that mean that he's a chosen person? No.
Well, I can promise you, I would never stand out here and say, the reason I can't believe in Jesus is because there were former pimps and prostitutes that followed him. I mean, come on, man, if that's not poorly thought out, what is? Think, man, think. I can't explain it. Plant life comes from plant life. Human life comes from human life. Animal life comes from animal life. Never once in your experience do you see life come from non-life. It's far more plausible for me to believe in the beginning God than it is for me to believe in the beginning inanimate matter. Why? Because all of my observation is life comes from life. When have you observed life come from non-life?
Well, think of all the other things you observe. Do you observe the Earth at the center? Do you observe the Sun at the center of the universe? No, you don't, do you? Do you think the Sun is it a heliocentric universe? Do you observe that? No, we know that from other things. Sometimes
from other observations.
That's right. Sometimes our intuitive observations are mistaken. For a long time.
Please give me an observation that you have made where life comes from non-life.
Why do I have to do that? That doesn't prove anything.
Well, then hopefully you understand why I find it far more reasonable to believe in the beginning God, a living being, than for me to believe in the beginning inanimate matter.
You ask for evidence. You're saying, here's this evidence for this, here's this evidence for that. What kind of evidence would you accept to show that you're wrong? Is there any evidence? And what would that be?
Say again?
What kind? You're providing evidence in support of your argument.
Right.
Right, that's good.
Thank you.
What evidence might there be where you'd say, okay, maybe I'm mistaken? What form would that take?
Evidence that order and design comes about randomly by chance.
So if a rock sort of fell over and turned into a goat, for example, like that.
If your shirt came together by accident, if your shoes came together by accident, if a wristwatch came together by accident, if an automobile came together by, if you just take all the pieces of an engine, put them in a dryer, turn the dryer on, and wait for an engine to come out. If an engine comes out of that dryer, I'm going to have to go back and reconsider. Just take all the pieces of an engine, put them in a dryer, turn the dryer on, spin that baby, and if an engine comes out of there, you bet I've got to go back and reconsider.
That's right, but evolution says that most of the things didn't work. That's right. Most of the times you spin the parts of an engine in a dryer, you're right, it doesn't come out. 10,000 times to one, it doesn't come out. It comes out as jumble, rubbish. But occasionally, what comes out does represent something. Very, very rarely, but occasionally it does, and that's progress.
You're right.
Evolution doesn't say that every time.
Good point. Good point. I've had alphabet soup. And when I stir those little letters together, occasionally T and O come together. Two. But see, the thing is, if I keep on stirring, the two doesn't stay there.
But if those two.
Now, if that's not going to happen in such a limited situation, for you to try and argue that this cosmos came together by accident, in light of the continuing change that's always occurring, that's preposterous, man.
No, it's not preposterous. Because if that T and O came together and was somehow able to, and if there was a mechanism by which that T and O could pass on that T and O combination to future T's and O's, which of course you're choosing an example where the passing of the T and O combination is implausible, but if it could pass on those T and O's, and if, for example, you gave preferred T and O's, you said, I hate all those Z's and W's, T and O's are what I'm going to eat, then you would begin to see more T and O's.
Yeah, but don't you understand? Your whole argument is those T's and O's become life.
No, that's not my argument.
Sure it is. That's the argument of evolution and Darwinism.
My argument.
The evolution is chance mutations, natural selection, and there we go. And my point is, you're never going to get the animate from the inanimate. You're never going to get life from non-life.
By what? Why do you say that?
Because of your experience, your observation, my experience, my observation.
There's lots of things I believe that I haven't experienced. Lots of things.
Okay, like what?
Electrons. I've never seen an electron, I believe it.
Why do you believe there's an electron? Why?
Because of the evidence that
Thank you, because of the evidence.
That's
all
right.
right. So don't play that game with me. You obviously believe what you believe because evidence supports it. I have never observed.
You can't go from saying, on one moment I'm going to use my intuitive knowledge that I've never seen anything happen, so it can't happen, and then immediately shift and said, oh, but scientists have discovered it one moment. Choose one argument or the other.
No,
Don't be
I have witnessed the birth of babies, of animals. I have watched plants grow. I have observed life come from life. I have never seen life come from non-life.
And when you see these babies born, do they ever differ? Are they exactly the same?
Oh, they differ a lot.
They do differ, right?
Yes, they do.
And do sometimes the babies sometimes resemble the babies, right? There's family resemblance.
Yes, there's family resemblance.
Right. And is it plausible to suggest that some babies born with one leg might not do as well as babies born with two legs?
Absolutely.
So in that case, you have seen change. And so if let's imagine that did happen, right? So that after many, many generations, you would begin to see more babies with two legs than one leg. And then what you would do 10,000 years later, you'd say, when everyone had two legs, you'd say, oh, I've never seen one-legged person turn into a two-legged person. That can't possibly happen.
No, that was really twisted thinking. I have done a lot. I have done a lot of work in breeding. And I can promise you.
In greeting.
Breeding. B-R-E-E-D-I-N-G. Breeding of horses and breeding of dogs.
Right.
And I can promise you.
Yeah.
In breeding, you eventually hit a wall.
Okay.
Horses always produce horses.
That's right.
They never produce giraffes or alligators or chickens. And so the whole idea that horses will eventually produce another type of species is totally fallacious. Just study breeding.
Most of your argument's been, to this point, we can't see this. It's not evidence. You're never going to see this. First of all, there have been experiments where they have shown that electrical charges combined with certain amino acids form the very basic building blocks of life.
Oh, really? Who showed that?
Specifically, I cannot recall. Are you going to, posit me on that because I can't recall?
No, I'll help you then. In 1953, University of Chicago, Dr. Miller put together some chemicals, introduced an electrical charge, and amino acid came out. Isn't that the experiment you're referring to?
It's probably one of them.
Well, that's the one that hit the national press back in 1953. He did that there at the University of Chicago. But you got to realize there's some basic problems with that if you're trying to use that as an argument that life comes from non-life.
Okay.
One of the basic problems is when you do that with amino acids, they come out left-handed and right-handed. But living organisms come from only left-handed amino acids. And if you have the right-handed ones in there, you destroy the life. The life doesn't happen. And when you do that kind of thing with amino acids, they come out 50-50, right-handed and left-handed. And you don't have life. Secondly, what they did was those scientists took pure chemicals, mixed the two pure chemicals. You never have that in nature. You never have pure chemical A and pure chemical B interacting. You always have chemical C and D mixed in. You don't have these pure isolated chemicals. Thirdly, what Dr. Miller did there at the University of Chicago was, as soon as he got these amino acids out of this reaction, He protected them. He isolated them. If he wouldn't have, they'd have been destroyed immediately. Now that's exactly what I believe. Intelligent mind takes matter and makes life. That's exactly what happened in 1953 at the University of Chicago. That's exactly what I as a theist believe. Intelligent mind takes matter and energy, puts it together in a very orderly way, and you've got life.
See, the problem is you're assuming science holds to the same standard as religion.
No, I am not. I've said that is not true. You've misquoted me totally.
Right.
Science is a study of process. Religion and philosophy are a study of the mind behind the process, and they are not the same study.
See, that's not what I was referring to.
Well, then what are you referring to?
The standard which I hold it to, and the reason why I respect science in general, greater
Yes.
than religions, especially Christianity, is the fact that science posits that it is fallible. That they say, this is what we know to the best of our ability. If you ask someone whether or not amino acids existed in the 1500s, they'd have thought you were ludicrous, because at the time, they
Right.
could not observe that.
Right.
And the fact that you're telling me that I cannot observe life coming from non-life by the methods that we have now, and by the processes that we have now, and by the knowledge that we have now, is not a valid argument. I'm not saying that I have seen that, but I'm not saying that I can't see that.
That is not my argument. You're misquoting me. My whole argument has been, you do not get life coming from non-life. You do not get a bunch of information like DNA without an intelligent being.
Why?
Why? Because your experience in life shows you that in order for there to be highly intricate information being communicated, there's got to be some type of intelligent mind behind it.
Experience is a fallacious argument, and the fact that
Observation, sir, observation.
we don't have a trillion-year observation span for any individual human.
Well, sir, have you ever heard of the Big Bang?
Yes.
Obviously, we don't have a trillion years we're working with. Obviously, sir, we got about 13 billion years we're working with, if the Big Bang is true. And obviously, the Big Bang seems to be supported by quite a bit of evidence. So please don't talk to me about a trillion years. We don't have a trillion years to work with. We've got somewhere, no, it's not semantics. We've got around 13 billion years since the Big Bang. Because the universe is expanding, it obviously is pointing us to the fact that there's a beginning. It's expanding, so there was a beginning. And right now, the best scientific astronomers show us that it's about 13 billion years. So please don't tell me we've got an infinite amount of time, because we don't.
All right, what happens, to the best of our scientific knowledge, presently, it appears that the universe is going to end in heat death. What are the ramifications on God in that situation?
Oh, obviously. If there is a God who created this whole process, then it's totally possible for him to intervene. And that's exactly what Jesus Christ claimed to be. Jesus Christ claimed to be God intervening, come to bring us life, with him, eternal life. And Christ promised that he would return a second time. He promised that history would end, not with a whimper of entropy as the sun burns out and we all freeze to death. Christ promised to return a second time. There'd be a day of judgment, and there'd be a real heaven and a real hell. That's why, as a follower of Christ, have hope for the future. I hope that you're intellectually consistent enough to realize that despair is the only logical conclusion for your worldview.
What I'm saying is that the fact that we think, or that we think that we think, is not saying that there's something absent from thinking and strictly physics.
Well, the evidence is if there is no God, you don't have free will. You're just a machine. That's all I am.
Yeah.
Okay, then you're not going to hold me responsible for smacking him in the face, are you? Because I'm not free, you're not free. We're just all biochemical reactions, complex as all get out, but that's all we are.
Well, the fact is that your reaction to smacking him would set in part a motion within whatever the system of reactions that I have to bring about some change in that. It's as an equation, if nothing else. And the simple, if you reduce it all the way down to physics, neurotransmitters,
which is what you have to do if you're going to be an atheist. That's all there is. Physics, matter and energy. Which means when she says, I love you, you understand she doesn't love me. I turn her on sexually. Which means when your mom and dad tell you that they love you, you understand they don't love me. They just have a drive to preserve the genetic pool.
And?
Well, then you don't live in the la-la land of love being real. Because you realize it's all a biochemical reaction, right?
See, I make a choice to...
No, you don't have free will, remember?
No, you see...
No, you don't have free will. You don't make a choice.
Simplifying again.
No, I'm not simplifying. Dr. William Provine, biologist at Cornell University, speaks on university campuses around the country, strict Darwinist, points out very clearly, because Darwinism is the truth, human beings have no free will, there is no meaning to life, there are no moral absolutes, and there's obviously no life after death. So stop jumping, if you're an atheist and a Darwinist, into this la-la land of, I choose. You don't choose nothing. You do what your complex biochemical reactions program you to do.
And how can you say that you don't?
My experience in life is that I judge and critique myself. My experience in life is that tonight I will sit on my bed and I will critique how I responded to students out here. And I will say, Cliff, when you spoke to that student, you were rude. Don't do that again. Cliff, when you spoke to that other student, you did a good job. Do that. Self-perception, self-reflection, judging myself convinces me that I do have free will.
So if all right, let's say we get a little more abstract on this. If a sufficiently complex computer program could respond to you indistinguishably from a human, would you say it was alive and had a soul and had a will?
I would say that that computer was put together by a highly, highly intelligent being and was programmed to do certain things in a very sophisticated way. I can promise you I would never conclude that that computer was an accident.
But would it have free will?
I don't know.
So empirical is no longer good enough? As far as if it tells you that it's self-reflective?
I don't know if we as human beings can create a machine that has a free will. I don't know that. But I can promise you, you don't get a computer as a result of an explosion in a metal factory.
See, you're jumping steps again.
I jump all over the place the same way you do.
The steps you're assuming, though, are just trying to simplify the argument so it doesn't.
You're right.
stand.
I'm trying to simplify and simplify. That's correct. Because I want to slap you in the face as hard as I can with reality. And I don't want to lose you. I want to communicate as simply as I can. Life doesn't come from non-life. Don't take it from me. Just go out and observe. Observe. Observe reality. Life does not come from non-life.
What's the difference between...
It all comes from life. So therefore, you got to ask yourself, is it more reasonable to believe we come from God, or is it more reasonable to believe we come from matter and energy?
Well, if we were talking about virtue-based ethics, I would say it's relative. But that's
So there
why
is
I
no
don't
such thing as
subscribe to
virtue. What is virtue?
Exactly, it's relative.
Correct.
That's why I don't agree with virtue-based ethics as a moral theory. I mean, thank you for reinforcing my belief in that.
It's fine. So you're saying my reason is the basis of my ethical system.
Right.
Fine.
You're given reason.
Stalin had reasons for his utilitarian
Reason
ethics.
separates man from the animal. The fact that you have a rational mind.
Yeah.
And that's what separates.
That's another piece of evidence for God's existence. And that's what Darwin had the honesty to begin to struggle with. Darwin wrote a letter to a man named Mr. Graham in the 1800s. And in this letter he writes, in light of the fact that our brains are simply highly developed monkeys' brains, why should we trust our brains to tell us the truth? Would you trust the thoughts of a monkey? And obviously Darwin is beginning to struggle with epistemological nihilism. The reason I trust my mind to tell me the truth about reality is because I'm convinced that behind my mind lies God. This incredible device that you're leaning on so heavily. How on earth can you believe that the rational mind is an accident?
I didn't say I had to believe that. I just said, in the case that you can't know God's true motives, why do you have to look to God to tell you how to live your life?
Sir, if there is no God, your rational mind and my rational mind are accidents.
I didn't say that. I just
Okay,
said,
you
why
believe
do
there is a God?
Why do you? That's not my point. That's not my point at all. Why do you have to look to God to tell you what to do? Why do you need someone to say, well, you know, if you do wrong, like I said, I'm going to spank you later?
Okay, but have you got my point about the rational mind?
Sure.
And you've got the point about epistemological nihilism, right?
Sure.
Okay. All right, now I'll seek to answer you. My conscience convicts me that I don't care if every single one of you tells me date rape is good. I am convinced that date rape is absolutely wrong. Why? Because I have a conscience that ties me into a value of justice. I cannot put justice in the bottom of a test tube. but my conscience informs me that the value of justice is very real. The only way that justice can be real, a moral absolute, is if there is some type of God to create and define that value. Fyodor Dostoevsky puts it best in The Brothers Karamazov when he writes, if there is no God, everything is permissible. All right?
But I don't think everything's permissible.
Well, if there is no God, everything's permissible. Because you define for yourself, and the date rapist defines for himself what's wrong. And if you happen to disagree with the date rapist, you're not more right, he's not more right. It's all relative.
If I came up with a moral theory that consistently came out with the same actions of right and wrong as God's theory of what's right and wrong, would you say that that was an imperfect moral theory?
If there is no God, you bet.
No, I'm saying there's a God. You have all his teachings of what's right and wrong. I come up with a moral theory, not just saying like, you know, what God said. I come up with a consistent moral theory, a code or whatever, that basically comes up with the same answer in every situation. Is that an imperfect moral theory?
I think it's interesting, and I got a lot of respect for Immanuel Kant and the categorical imperative. But still, I think it's crystal clear, as the atheistic existentialists point out time and time again, that if there is no God, life is meaningless. And part of the reason that life is meaningless is, if you begin to realize that morality is relative, you realize it doesn't matter whether you poison your girlfriend to death or whether you love her. It's all relative. So whatever you choose to do on your date rape, murder, lover, it really ultimately doesn't matter. It's whatever you choose to do. That's legit for you.
Are you saying that this eternal being that created the universe wouldn't have the ability to dupe you completely?
Exactly.
Sure he would. Yes. But when you look at Jesus Christ, you'll notice he didn't dupe anybody. When you look at Jesus Christ, you'll notice a life of incredible compassion, of amazing integrity. In fact, I've tried to live it, and I have failed miserably in my attempt. And one of the things I appreciate about Gandhi is, Gandhi communicated how he blew it badly when he lived in South Africa. He adopted a lot of racist attitudes. Really good people that I've come in contact with, part of the reason they're really good is because they know they struggle with evil. Like a Gandhi, like a Dr. Martin Luther King, like an Abraham Lincoln. Jesus Christ lived this incredibly good life, but then he said, I'm morally perfect. He said, I'm God. Man, the guy's either a fanatic, or else he is who he claimed to be. God in human form, come to rescue us.
And why is fanatic not possible?
Well, read the Gospels and ask yourself.
Or even just
the way that Jesus treated people, is that the earmark of a fanatic?
But the point is that you can't tell one way or the other.
Oh, yes, I can.
How?
I can tell you the evidence is that Jesus Christ is not playing games with people. He bled and died on a cross for our sins, he claimed. Then he rose from the dead. He lived an incredibly sacrificial life. He did not manipulate or abuse people. I like that. I like it a lot. Now, the reason that I don't think you can live out this ruse idea is, if you're going to embrace that type of cynicism that you're embracing, you can't trust anybody. You will be a totally isolated, lonely person. I don't think you can live out what you're positing here.
No, that's not the point. The point is
yes, that is the point.
No, the point of it is to say that if you can't know exactly, if you can't know between options 4 or 5 which one is true based on the evidence. I mean, granted, he could have sent Jesus down as part of this big ruse in order to get some more pleasure when people die because they thought they were going to be saved. I mean, but the point is if you can't really know, then why do you have to look to God to see how you should live your life?
Sir, I assume that what you're saying, you're taking seriously. All right? Now, if you're going to take seriously the idea that possibly Jesus Christ is out to rip us off, then, sir, there's no basis for you to trust anybody, because the quality of Jesus' life had so much compassion. He was such the consummate gentleman that if you're thinking, well, wait a second, what's the real motive here? He must be out to rip me off. If you're going to be consistent and apply that to every person, sir, you can't trust anybody. What on earth are you doing here as a student? Giving as much money to sit in a professor's class. What on earth are you doing going to sleep at night trusting a roommate not to blow you away while you're asleep in your bed at night? No, not if he's going to be consistent. If you're going to be that consistently skeptical, that's consistently cynical, your life's going to fall apart.
I understand that. I just don't think it's necessary to base your morals and your actions on something like that.
Okay, who are you going to base your morals on?
There's plenty of consistent moral theory out there.
Sure, which one you choosing?
Categorical imperative.
Categorical imperative. Okay, define it. As Kant did, right?
Basically, it's not necessarily exactly as Kant defined.
All right, well, so
it.
you define your categorical imperative for me.
That if an action is right, if you do not will inconsistently by doing that action.
An action is right.
Such as you do not will inconsistently when performing that action. Such as, we'll take a case in point. If I will, and what you have to do is you take scenarios and you remove all the players. Say I will that I don't be, that no one kills me, but I will that I should be able to kill this guy. Well, that's inconsistent, because if you take the players out, I can't will that I not be killed, yet still will that I be able to kill.
Okay, good. So obviously you have this bias towards being consistent. Obviously I don't share your bias. I have no problem with being inconsistent. So although I don't want you to steal my stock portfolio, I feel very free to steal your stock portfolio. And I define that as being morally good. You have no problem with that, I hope, do you?
Well, that's inconsistent willing.
So what? You have a prejudice towards being consistent. I don't share your prejudice.
Well, it's irrational.
You have a bias towards being rational.
Sure.
I don't share your bias. The point I'm obviously trying to drive at is, if there is no God, sir, all of morality is relative. And you can build whatever moral scheme you want to, but that's your own bias. And I've got my own biases. Which means, sir, if you think about it, it doesn't matter whether you become like Mother Teresa or Adolf Hitler. All morality is relative. It's all just a bias.
That's not true.
Of course it is.
No, you're calling out
yes,
and you're
it
taking
is.
applied moral theory and use as opposed to moral theory as a criterion of actual right and wrong. See, what you're doing is you're taking this moral theory and you're saying, well, people could not apply it, so therefore it's not a good moral theory. Well, that's not true. That doesn't mean that it's not a criterion of right and wrong.
Sir, if there is no God, there is no conscious mind prior to the human mind. So you and I, all of us, with our conscious minds, create our own morality. And if you want to create your own categorical imperative, which happens to be a little different from Kant's, that's fine. You've got your own categorical imperative, Kant has his own categorical imperative, and Joseph Stalin has his own utilitarian ethics. And Stalin's utilitarian ethics tell him, in order to get the most amount of happiness for the most amount of people, we got to slaughter a few million people, win the war, bring about the communist dream. And that's his definition of morality. And a white South African says, we got to keep back black people in apartheid because that keeps us white folks happy, nice families, nice power. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. It's all relative because it's all defined by the human mind. But if there is a God whose mind exists prior to the human mind, then it's possible for this God to create a moral absolute.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this episode. Hit that subscribe button. We love for you to join the family. Also, want to invite you to our church in New Canaan, Connecticut. It's New Canaan High School, and it meets Sundays at 9:30 a.m.